On the morning of August 12, 2024, in the rural outskirts of Chilton, Texas, 18-year-old Ace Patton Ashford went out to care for a sick calf. It was something routine for him. Ace had grown up in a rodeo family and was deeply involved in the cowboy lifestyle from an early age. His parents, Troy and Jamie Ashford, were known in the rodeo world, and his older brother, Ross Ashford, had competed at the National Finals Rodeo. Ace had just graduated from his high school and was preparing to start college on a rodeo scholarship. He had a future in the sport, already decorated with championship titles. He was well known in the Texas roping circuit, having recently won events like the Patriot number 11.5 and Rito Buckle number 10.5. That morning, he was working on a family property in a pasture a little west of Highway 7. There was a sick calf, and Ace had ridden out on horseback to check on it, something, like I said in the beginning, he had done many times before. Ace was experienced and focused. He was on his horse with the tools of his trade, doing what he knew best. At some point during the task, something went wrong. Whether it was the horse reacting to the calf, a sudden noise, or just a bad step, the horse became spooked. Horses can react suddenly in moments of fear, and when they do, there's often no warning. The rope Ace was using somehow became tangled around his leg. It may have happened while he was dismounting or walking near the horse, or while adjusting slack, something anyone in his position might have done 100 times before without issue. But this time was different. The horse bolted, and Ace's leg was caught. Before he had a chance to free himself or react, the horse was already in motion, dragging him across the uneven terrain of the pasture. The rope acted like a snare, tightening with the horse's momentum. He couldn't loosen it. He couldn't get up. He was pulled fast and hard, his body striking the ground repeatedly. The speed of a spooked horse, especially in open space, is enough to turn a dragging into a fatal event in seconds. It was mid-August in central Texas, hot, dry, with the kind of terrain that's dusty and hard-packed. Pastures like that can be filled with uneven ground, old fence posts, dry brush, and scattered rocks. When someone's being dragged behind a fast-moving animal across that kind of surface, every impact adds to the trauma. Skin can tear open from friction alone, clothing offers little protection, and the head, being the most vulnerable part of the body, can take catastrophic damage even from a single strike against the hard ground. When handling livestock, especially alone, the rope is often attached to the saddle horn or loosely held if repositioning. All it takes is for a loop to tighten around a limb when the horse moves. That's the danger. It happens fast. The horse reacts, the rope tightens, and within seconds, the rider is no longer in control. Ace knew what he was doing. This wasn't about inexperience. It was one of those rare and awful moments where the combination of timing, precision, and panic led to something that couldn't be stopped in time. Witnesses or the first people on the scene later said Ace was found with significant trauma. He had been dragged a considerable distance. His head had taken the brunt of the impact, likely striking rocks, posts, or hard ground, causing trauma severe enough to result in skull fractures, swelling of the brain, and internal bleeding. The force alone can be fatal, but it was made worse by the length of the dragging and the inability to stop it. When emergency responders arrived, he was barely alive. He still had a pulse, he was still breathing. That meant there was hope, and that was enough to try everything. He was airlifted to Baylor, Scott, and White Hospital in Temple. In a case like this, time is everything. Blunt force trauma from being dragged can cause not just brain damage, but blood loss, crushed organs, and shock. Even with fast transport and a trauma team ready, the brain can shut down from oxygen loss or swelling. Doctors did everything they could, but the damage was too much. Ace died later that morning. The official cause of death was listed as blunt force trauma to the head, along with complications from being dragged. In the remote desert town of Chloride, Arizona, located about 25 miles north of Kingman, the landscape is dry, rugged, and scattered with reminders of the past. One of those reminders, largely invisible to the casual eye, is a network of old abandoned mine shafts, many of them unmarked and uncovered. These remnants of Arizona's mining history are common in Mohave County and pose a serious threat to anyone unaware of their presence. On September 1st, 2007, two sisters set out for an ATV ride near Chloride, Arizona. 13-year-old Ricky Howard and her 10-year-old sister Casey Hicks were riding together on an ATV. Their father rode ahead of them on a dirt bike, leading the way through the desert paths. It was the kind of evening the family had shared before, taking advantage of the open space and the freedom that comes with rural life. The desert trails around Chloride are often used by locals for riding, exploring, and spending time outdoors, but these areas are also dotted with hazards. Many of the mine shafts that remain from Arizona's mining boom are narrow, some extending over 100 feet straight down. Many of them were never properly sealed or marked, and over time, erosion and desert brush can seal their entrances, leaving no clear sign of danger unless you're standing right on top of them. As the ride continued, the girls and their father became separated. Whether the ATV slowed down or the dirt bike pulled too far ahead isn't exactly clear, but what is known is that the girls were no longer behind him. When their father realized they weren't following, he turned back to look for them. He searched the trails and called out their names, but there was no answer. After trying to locate them himself, with no success, he contacted authorities to report his daughters missing. A search effort began that night. Local law enforcement and search and rescue teams responded and began combing the area, looking for any sign of the girls or the ATV. In the early hours of the next morning, at around 6:20 a.m., rescuers discovered signs of disturbance around an unmarked mine shaft. When the girl's father approached and called down, he heard something from below. One of the girls answered. She was alive. The shaft was measured to be approximately 120 feet deep. The ATV had gone over the edge and fallen straight to the bottom. There were no barriers, no warning signs, and the opening was partially obscured by brush. To anyone riding nearby, it would have just looked like normal terrain. ATVs, even at moderate trail speeds, can quickly reach 20 to 30 miles per hour on flat desert terrain. In a situation like this, it would have only taken seconds for the ATV to cross into danger once the edge was breached. A technical rescue team prepared to descend into the shaft, using rope systems and harnesses. They carefully lowered a rescuer down the narrow opening. Descending into such a shaft is extremely dangerous, requiring specialized training and equipment. Rescuers had to navigate tight walls, unstable surfaces, and limited visibility to safely reach the bottom. Mine shafts, like the one the girls fell into, are vertical, narrow, and often reinforced only by rotting wood or exposed rock. The floor is typically uneven and surrounded by broken stone or debris, making any kind of fall into one immediately life-threatening. At the bottom, they found both Ricky and Cassie. The ATV was also at the bottom, heavily damaged from the fall. Cassie was seriously injured but alive and responsive. Ricky, the older of the two, had not survived. What rescuers discovered was that Ricky had likely died almost instantly upon impact. The ATV, weighing several hundred pounds, had landed directly on top of her, crushing her beneath it. The fall itself, over 12 stories down, would have caused catastrophic injuries to any unrestrained rider. At that depth, a body accelerates rapidly, and the force of the impact is massive. Reports later confirmed that the blunt force trauma she sustained was caused by both the fall and by the ATV's full weight collapsing onto her chest and torso. Injuries from that kind of fall can include shattered bones, crushed organs, and internal bleeding. For someone caught under a machine like that, the pressure is so severe it can cause near instant collapse of the lungs or heart. Ricky suffered multiple compound fractures and blunt trauma to the head, neck, and spine, injuries that no one could survive, even with immediate care. The wreckage around her showed signs of how violently the ATV had struck the shaft floor, flipping and crushing down with lethal force. From the time the ATV went over the edge to the moment it hit the floor, only a few seconds had passed. There was no time to steer away, no time to react. Everything happened so fast. Cassie, who was also thrown during the fall, had landed nearby and avoided the full brunt of the ATV's impact. She was seriously injured. Reports noted trauma to her spine, pelvis, and legs, but she remained fully conscious, and she was able to respond when her father and rescuers called down to her. It was considered nothing short of a miracle that she had survived the fall at all. The rescue team began carefully preparing Cassie to be lifted to the surface. She was stabilized and brought up using ropes, then immediately airlifted to University Medical Center in Las Vegas, Nevada for emergency trauma treatment. Emergency responders then turned their efforts to recovering Ricky. They secured her body with care and brought her to the surface for proper handling. In early January 2025, the rural town of Voltaire, North Dakota, was wrapped in winter's typical silence. The town sits in McHenry County, a small place where most people know each other and lend a hand when needed. On a calm evening, 64-year-old Corey Stevens was doing what most people in rural communities do without thinking twice, trying to solve a problem himself. It started when his pickup truck, an older Ford F-350, slipped off a private driveway and became stuck in a ditch. The winter conditions had made the ground uneven, icy, and unpredictable. In areas like this, it's not uncommon for vehicles to drift or slide off course, especially when backing out or maneuvering tight spaces. The ditch wasn't particularly deep or dangerous on its own, but the truck's tires had lost traction and it wasn't going anywhere without assistance. Rather than call a tow company, which might take hours to arrive in a rural setting, Stephen reached out to a friend nearby, a 74-year-old man from Balfour who agreed to come help. The friend arrived in a 2002 GMC Yukon, and together they began planning how to tow the F-350 out of the ditch and back onto the driveway. They hooked the Yukon to the F-350 using a tow strap. The general approach in these situations is simple. The towing vehicle slowly pulls forward, applying just enough force to give the stuck vehicle the momentum it needs to climb out. These kinds of tows are usually low speed, controlled, and depend heavily on clear coordination between both people involved. That coordination becomes even more important when there are nearby structures, tight corners, or poor visibility. In this case, the truck had come to rest near a structure, likely a shed or a garage. To ensure that everything was aligned safely, Steven stepped out of the truck to check the progress. He may have wanted to verify the strap placement, check the tires, or just make sure they weren't about to hit anything. That's when the miscommunication occurred. His friend, assuming Stevens was still inside the F-350 and ready for the pull, began to drive the Yukon forward. What he didn't realize was that Steven had moved into the narrow space between the rear of his pickup truck and the building. From the Yukon's position, there was likely no clear view of Steven. With both engines running, the noise and distance would have masked any warnings or movements. From the towing vehicle, it can be nearly impossible to see directly behind the tow truck, especially at night and low light, or without mirrors or spotters involved. When one person assumes the other is inside the vehicle, it creates a blind zone that can quickly become fatal. As the Yukon pulled forward, the tow strap snapped tight, and the F-350 jolted forward out of the ditch. Even at low speeds, when a tow strap tightens, the stuck vehicle can lurch forward several feet in a fraction of a second. With no driver inside to brake or steer, the momentum becomes uncontrollable in those moments. At that exact moment, Steven was still in the narrow space behind his truck. The heavy pickup, weighing over 5,000 pounds, surged toward the structure, closing the gap in an instant. He was caught directly between the back of the truck and the hard surface of the building, with no time to move or shout. The impact was immediate and devastating. Steven's body was crushed between the solid rear of the truck and the rigid exterior of the structure. The force from even a low-speed impact by a vehicle of that size is enough to cause traumatic internal injuries. His chest was likely compressed. His chest was compressed with massive force, leading to the rupture of vital organs, particularly the lungs and heart. His ribs were fractured on contact, potentially puncturing the lungs or arteries. These types of injuries can cause immediate collapse of circulation and breathing, even before responders arrive. Emergency services were called immediately. First responders arrived at the scene to find Stephen pinned between the rear bumper of the F-350 and the structure's wall. Fire and EMS teams worked quickly to move the truck, extract him, and began CPR. There were likely signs of traumatic blunt force injuries, crushing to the chest cavity, and possibly visible deformities from broken bones. He remained unresponsive throughout the resuscitation efforts. Despite the urgency, Stephen succumbed to his injuries en route to the hospital. The North Dakota Highway Patrol conducted an investigation and later confirmed the cause of death as blunt force trauma caused by being pinned between the vehicle and the structure. The friend who had been towing the vehicle cooperated fully with investigators. There was no evidence of reckless behavior, only a heartbreaking lapse in communication between two men trying to handle what seemed like a simple towing job. In the early hours of January 12, 2016, oilfield worker reported for duty at a remote well site operated by Pioneer Oil Company, Inc. The company, based in Indiana and part of the oil and gas support services industry, employed field technicians responsible for maintaining and operating pump jacks, mechanical systems designed to lift oil from wells that no longer produce naturally under their own pressure. The man was experienced and familiar with the equipment. His task that morning was something he had likely done many times before: start the pump jack and make sure it was functioning properly. Pump jacks, sometimes referred to as nodding donkeys or horse heads, rely on a system of rotating and reciprocating parts. One of the key components is the clutch assembly, a device that engages the motor and allows power to be transferred to the mechanical arms that draw oil from underground. Shortly before 7 a.m., he arrived at the pump and prepared to start the unit. Part of this process included activating the drive motor and manually engaging the clutch. This involves close interaction with the spinning shafts, belts, or couplings, moving parts that rotate at high speeds once the motor is running. Though reliable, the machinery is unforgiving and leaves little room for error. Contact with any of these moving components can result in catastrophic consequences. At some point during the startup procedure, the man's shirt came in contact with the rotating clutch assembly. Loose-fitting clothing around such equipment poses a significant risk, something well known in the industry. In this case, the fabric was drawn into the rotating shaft or coupling mechanism. Within minutes, the spinning component pulled more of the shirt inward, wrapping tighter and pulling the worker directly into the machine. Once entangled, the outcome was both violent and immediate. The torque generated by the spinning shaft can exceed hundreds of pounds, easily enough to tear fabric, break bones, and crush tissue. And the machinery didn't stop. It continued to rotate, tightening its grip on the man as it pulled him deeper into the mechanism. His body made repeated contact with solid steel components. The result was a brutal series of impacts, including crushing trauma to the chest, shoulders, and possibly the head. Limbs can become caught and twisted, bones can snap under pressure, internal organs can rupture from sheer force. The machine couldn't distinguish between fabric and flesh. Friction alone can tear skin, and the rotating parts inflicted severe trauma as they dragged him further in. The pressure exerted on the body would have caused massive blunt force trauma, extensive bruising, and likely deep lacerations. His body was torn partially out of alignment, tangled in a position no human body is meant to withstand. There would have been little time to cry out or respond. It is likely he lost consciousness quickly, but not before suffering significant injury. What makes this tragedy even more haunting is that no one was there to see it happen or stop it. The man worked alone. Once he was pulled in, the machinery continued operating uninterrupted, indifferent to the human suffering it had just caused. It wasn't until approximately 2:22 p.m. that a coworker arrived at the site to check on operations. That's when the horrific scene was discovered. The man's body was found beneath the pump jack, his clothing torn, his body visibly injured, and parts of him still caught in the machine. Emergency services were contacted immediately, but there was nothing more they could do. He had been dead for hours. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration launched an investigation. The report classified the incident as a fatal caught-in accident, a common and preventable type of workplace death where a worker becomes entangled in rotating or moving parts. The investigation determined that the worker had engaged the clutch assembly when his clothing was caught in the rotating parts, ultimately leading to the fatal injuries. The equipment was functioning properly. There was no electrical or mechanical malfunction. The issue was human. A lack of machine guarding, absence of a second person on site, and the simple but deadly risk of loose clothing around moving machinery.
And now, folks, it's time to say goodnight. We sincerely appreciate your patronage and hope we've succeeded in bringing you an enjoyable evening of entertainment. Please drive home carefully and come back again soon. Good night.